Good evening. It is time for our Rise of the False Gods book study. Tonight, our question is, are you under the influence? Now, we are going to be, for those who are following along in the book, we are going to be on we're going to start on page 28. And are you under the influence? Well, first of all, we need to know what the influence is because that's something that's really spiritual. No, I'm not talking about any substance or anything. I am back. Um, we're not talking about substance or anything. We're talking about the influence of lower consciousness. So in the book on page 28, halfway down the page, it says, influence is power or effect something or someone has. Well, if we were talking about alcohol, it would be what happens is if you're under the influence, the alcohol would make you act a certain way. It would appear to have a power or an influence. Think of the word influence. Think of inflowing. Okay, like water flows in. It's an influence. Metaphysically speaking, manifestation originates in the mind, and it is the part of the mind that we're functioning through at that moment. So it is either going to be the higher consciousness, so we will be open to inspiration, or it will be the lower consciousness, which means we are being influenced by whatever is around us. To inspire means to guide or control by the divine. We're being filled with the Spirit, and because God is good, all good, everywhere present, we want to be, don't we want to be in that inflowing of good? One would think, one makes me wonder why I'm still struggling with my stuff on the planet. So think of the word inside, spire, which is spirit, which is also breath. Inspire, we breathe in spirit. Remember in Genesis, a second creation story, where it said, and God breathed life into the man, and he became a living being. So we're really living when we are filled with, when we breathe in spirit, when we are inspired. Influenced is not so good. We're being influenced by the lower consciousness. Now, you've heard me probably, if you've listened to any of my other videos and done classes, about the 4 quadrants of consciousness, which is the higher consciousness, which is spiritual mind, higher mind, and it is intuitive, that's quadrant 1, or spiritual higher mind sensing. Sensing is when we feel something. The more time we spend in our higher consciousness, the more we listen to the alignment. You know, it's funny because words can actually distort what we're meaning. Boy, I hate it when somebody doesn't understand what I'm saying. And sometimes maybe I just don't explain it so well. But when we get to spiritual mastery, that's when our intuition is so high and our sensing ability is so high that we wouldn't even consider listening to the lower self. What does the lower self say? Well, the first thing, that is the carnal mind. Carnal means physical, the physical being, the part of us that is actually a body that functions as a body. The body has certain cravings and it has certain desires. It seeks pleasure more than happiness. It seeks its own way. And because it's lower consciousness, it has a very great fear of extinction. And so it's a survival mechanism, which was necessary when we were less evolved. As we evolve mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, we have to kind of pull in the reins on that lower consciousness when it's in survival mode. So the carnal is the lower mind. It is human thought. It is the thought of the brain as opposed to the thought of the divine mind, the mind which operates as spirit. Also, in the lower mind, we find emotions. It's feeling. So try to get a picture of this. The word emotion, think about energy in motion, emotion, energy in motion. I'm sorry, I have a hair in my eye. I just brushed my hair before I came on, and I think something fell off the brush and into my eye. Good Lord. Okay, so if emotion is energy in motion, think of all the things you felt flow through you and influence you. That would be anger. When you have a moment of anger, you are being influenced, and most of that comes down to a survival mode. We're afraid we won't survive this. We're afraid there's a power that's against me, that's greater than me, that's going to hurt me. So all those lower. Jealousy is a fear that you will be replaced, a fear that someone is going to get ahead of you, someone is going to be better than you and leave you behind. When I was young, I was very tiny. I'm still tiny in a vertical sense, not so much in the horizontal, but anyway. I had the fact that I was so tiny and people picked on me a lot and they called me peanuts and, they'd always make jokes about how small I was. That led me to believe I was less than. So I fought for so long to try to be normal or equal. And golly, I got to tell you what a disaster that made in my life. And it's not like I have changed, okay? I want to be real clear about this. That spark of divinity that was in us is always perfect. It's always divine spirit working through us. It is the human part that does that craziness. We all have it. I mean, everybody has their challenges which formed them into what they are today. But usually if you're looking at the lower nature, not the higher nature. And it just blows my mind when I think of the amazing things I could have done had I not been so influenced by my human thought and my human emotion. But how many times have I told you we're here to learn? And I'm learning that one. It doesn't mean I'm there yet, but I am definitely working on it. So always think about your emotions are energy in motion working through you. All energy that is in motion is you, is a form, it comes from a thought or a feeling, an action, and it comes as influence, not inspire. All right? Okay. So I'm going to show it to you, but what I'm going to do is I'll attach it to the bottom of this message. And I know you're seeing it backward if you're watching it on Facebook, but when I reverse it for YouTube, you'll see it, the lower and the higher. I also made a little arrow here going up and down. And oops, down here, sorry, can't read backwards. Right here. So if you look at that bar and you think of it moving up and down, so there's times when we're way more spiritual and there's times when we're way more human. So that bar, that's the lower consciousness, would rise up and we would squeeze our little spiritual consciousness, not our spiritual self, because that's greater than all this, but our spiritual consciousness. I'm going to give you a very silly example that happened to me this morning. I was having that actually just that what I just said about the little arrow going up and down. That's on page 28, where the 4 quadrants of consciousness are. I drew in that little arrow with the up and down. It's like an elevator. Are you higher consciousness? Are you lower consciousness? Okay. Let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, the mind is pivotal. So we can focus on higher or we can focus on lower. And I'd like to say we ultimately have the power to focus on the higher or lower. Whether we do it or not is up to us. Okay. This is the tough part. It's not always easy. We are a work in progress, okay? Although we have the power, the purpose of prayer work and studying spirituality and applying the principles in our lives, that's how we learn to live in higher consciousness. I have challenges just like anybody else with slipping into fear and doubt and dread and oh my God. And it annoys the daylights out of me, but I'm working on it. I am a work in progress. So are you. We have the power to choose. What we need is the spirituality we need to focus and learn. And that's what you're doing here tonight. That's what you're doing right now, whenever you're watching this. You're working on exercising your spiritual muscle, as it were, to live a more spiritual life. Jesus said, I am in the world. I am not of the world. And that is the goal. Lower consciousness is the world. Higher consciousness is above it. It's where we're headed, where we want to live fully. It requires time and effort. So we have to be gentle with ourselves, I always say, when God was handing out patience, I just didn't want to stand around and wait. Well, I didn't have the patience. Patience is something God's trying to teach me. Okay, so we go on. And it said, when we are operating, this is on page 29, second paragraph, when we are in expressing as a spiritual being, we're in our higher mind. But we only have a human experience. When we are operating from our lower mind, we are a human being having an occasional spiritual experience. What do you want to be? Do you want to be a human being having a spiritual experience from time to time? Or do you want to be a spiritual being working in a physical environment that is ruled by spiritual law? That's that thing. It's by spiritual law. Ruled by spiritual law. I like to look at this from the perspective of training a dog, okay? We did this about a horse. Remember we were talking about being the horse whisperer? Well, being the dog whisperer. we have a body, and it is what they call in a traditional church a flesh. So we have our flesh, and our intention is to train it. And so we don't, just because we have a body doesn't mean our body is evil. It means we are training it to come to a higher level. As we lift ourselves spiritually, as we learn and practice principles, we will be able to connect to spiritual strength beyond the human level. That's where I want to go. Now, there's something that I've talked about before, and it's really hard for, you want to kind of come up? Tishy wants to visit. There's a lot of people that have PTSD. Now, I've talked before about why war is never the answer, even though it may be a circumstance that we are currently involved in. PTSD is a post-traumatic stress disorder. It means you've had a trauma. Something happened to you in your life, and it is still, it affects you unexpectedly. It's a disorder. It just kind of seems to have a control over you. That doesn't mean you can't get past it. It means you may have it. I believe that I experienced that through a very unhappy and abusive marriage. My going into, I've said this before to you, I'm sure, but I went into it with that consciousness that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't measure up, and I married someone who was happy to confirm that for me at every opportunity. So I came to have what I call knee-jerk reactions, that the minute I would think that an offense, an insult, a hurt was going to come again, I reacted whether anything happened or not. I'm sure you've seen and heard stories of soldiers who have PTSD, and they go crazy when there's fireworks. They have to try to avoid, or if they're around fireworks, they have to calm themselves, because that noise, that thing, that brings them right back into the battle that they were in, or the fear that they would, die, okay? So we all, a lot of us suffer from a form of PTSD in any way. We just have to not give it control in our lives. That is all in lower consciousness. But it was so traumatic, it has like claws that tries to keep us down. It could be anything. People that have been in the wildfires, God bless all those people that are losing their houses, their property, their animals. God bless us, because it's a part of Mother Earth that is, on fire, that provides us with food and fresh air and everything. And people that lost everything, they walk around first stunned, and then they start to get their life back to order. But don't you know, if there's something that comes in, if there's a storm, if there's, they hear that thunder, or they hear there's a hurricane coming, it all comes back. We have to know that's all in the lower consciousness, and we have to learn to elevate our consciousness and to know that there's one presence and one power in the universe and in our lives, God, the good, omnipotent. What's going on now in our streets with protests is an example that is very frightening, that we hear on the news, and I've got to underscore news there. We hear about the violence, we see the images, the burned out buildings, the tear gas, and that is traumatic. Why is that happening? It's because people are operating from a very human survival instinct. I mean, people get upset when they feel they have no control, and when they think that they cannot overcome whatever evil has befallen them. And I just read like 2 or 3 times, there's many sources to this, 93.6 or something percent of the protests have been peaceful. But what is our mind getting filled with? It's getting filled with images that traumatize us, that make us fear for our survival. One of the greatest battles that we are in right now as a collective is to learn to breathe and to trust God, to know that there is one presence and one power, and we're going to come through this. So we work on it on the individual level, and we look at it on the collective level. Are we under the influence? What are we under the influence of? And can we reach for inspiration? How do you reach for inspiration when you are feeling trauma, feeling stress, feeling like things are only getting worse? I mean, it's been I've read about it several times where psychiatrists and psychologists are, saying so many people are depressed and getting hope. They're losing their hope. And we have to keep our hope, because there is that one presence and one power. We will get through this. And we want to be a part of the positive change. Okay. So we have to, how do we do that? We remind ourselves of the one presence and one power, and keep thinking about the law of cause and effect. If I keep having these negative thoughts, I am going to keep having negative experiences, okay? And it all starts in mind. Remember, it starts in mind, and depending on where we focus our mind, on the positive or on the negative, that is up to us. We may not be able to control it every time, but when we can, and the more we can, the better we will get. I had an experience today. It's funny, when you're going to talk about something, God's going to give you an example to live by. Today, someone very dear to me had to go somewhere they really didn't want to go, and they were very nervous about going, and but they had something they needed to go, and they needed to get there and do that. And so I said, okay, call me when you're done. Call me when you get back home. Call me when it's okay. Well, she said it'd be about an hour. And I waited for that call, and I didn't get that call. And my fears started to kick in. And, that then it like starts to take over your mind. And then, another hour goes by, and another hour. And I didn't hear. I didn't hear back, and I'm like, this is not good. And I was under the influence of my negative emotions. I had to learn to let go. You know what? I didn't this time. I got the call, finally, that said, I'm okay. Everything's okay. My phone wasn't working. I couldn't call you. I didn't have a phone, but I was okay. I handled my business. I was okay. I will be okay. That was, it is scary. But, having gone through this today, and I say to myself, for God's sake, I am a unity minister. I know better than this. Why did I spend these hours tormenting myself because I feared? It's a part of the growing process. What will make a difference is the next time something like that happens, I know I'm going to work harder to respond more positively. We can't control someone else's life. We can't control what they do. We can only control what we do. And sometimes bad things happen. They do. They happen every day. Not always to us, but they happen. But we move on. And we grow and we learn, and none of it invalidates the presence and the power of God in our lives. I urge you, please take a lesson from my experience today. If you feel the influence of negative emotions, it could be jealousy, it could be fear, it could be anger, whatever it is, take that deep breath. Remind yourself, move your consciousness up beyond the human level. Why is it? We always worry? We think about the worst. We always worry about the worst because it's that survival instinct. But we have to remember, we are children of God. We are divine children of God. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, and we are eternal. So this survival fear that we have to let go of that. We may walk through some fire, but when you're walking through the fire, like, who was it that said it? Winston Churchill. If you're going through hell, keep going. Okay? Oh my, well, I am just about out of my designated time today. I didn't quite make it through, but you can go back and read it. And tomorrow, we're going to talk about the question of evil. We ask the question, how could there be evil if there's only one presence and one power in the universe and in our lives? God, the good, omnipotent. How could there be evil? We'll take a look at that tomorrow. Thank you so much for being with me. I hope you missed me as much as I missed doing the book study. And I'll look forward to tomorrow night as we look at evil. Take care and God bless.